One of the other fascinating things about how our senses have developed to perceive the world around us is what's called contrast. And that contrast, our senses developed because we're able to contrast things in our environment versus things that are right next to it. Okay? Which is how, camouflage actually works in the reverse. You're trying to blend into everything else.
Right.
Contrast is what is the faculty of our perception that allows us to differentiate things. Okay? Which is very useful.
Yeah.
So, you can see the jungle and you can also see the tiger that's stalking towards you.
Yes.
Okay? Contrast. Now, one of the effects of this is that humans are really bad at making absolute comparisons without the benefit of contrast. Okay? So a good example is, let's say, good example. I'll use buying a suit for a guy. And also you can talk about this. Actually, when you were selling wedding dresses, did you usually sell the accessories first, the veil and the belt and all of that stuff?
No way.
What would happen if you did that and then tried to sell them a dress?
Well, A, you wouldn't know what you were trying to match. But B, a $600 headpiece sounds a lot more expensive before you've bought a $7,000 dress.
Yep.
And so those would be the first two reasons I'd think about.
Yeah, what happens once somebody has bought a $7,000 dress and then starts to buy accessories?
Well, you kind of can fill in the picture a little bit more easily, I think is the first thing. And you've already bought something really, really, really expensive, so everything else seems like not such a big deal.
Yeah, even though, let's say they're buying a veil, which is basically a couple of yards of fabric and a little headpiece fixture thing for like $600.
Sometimes there's a lot of handwork.
Right.
And they're very expensive.
But in the absolute,
you're going to wear it for like 4 hours.
You're going to wear it for 4
Maybe
hours.
not even.
And it's a piece of fabric and a little piece of metal.
Right.
In the absolute, that may be very expensive.
Absolutely.
Compared to everything else. If they build it themselves, they could probably do it for what, $20?
If they could.
Depending on the fabric. So in the absolute, those comparisons, like a veil, that they would buy, from this establishment versus something that they make themselves, there's a huge difference.
Right.
But in contrast versus the huge price of the dress, a $600 veil versus a $7,000 dress,
throw it in.
Doesn't feel that much.
Right.
Same thing happens, guys, when you go out and buy a suit. Typically, there will be, and this is talked about in Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's a wonderful book. Talks about there's usually a couple of suits in every department store. Not even the nice fancy ones. Even go to some place like JCPenney, which is not the fanciest place on the face of the earth. They'll have a $2,000 suit, and they'll almost never sell it. The suit is there to provide contrast on everything else. So, versus a $2,000 suit, a $500, $400 suit.
Major deal.
Yeah, not that bad. It's on sale.
Right.
Sales are another form of contrast. But they'll sell you the suit, and then they'll try to sell you shoes and a belt and shirts and ties. And versus the initial suit purchase, all of those things, you may pay $90 for a shirt.
Which you would never do on a normal day.
Exactly. But versus the suit, it's less expensive. Yeah. So contrast is really important because that's how we evaluate things. We compare things against each other. And so it's important that we always compare things in the environment in which they are, not versus, another example of scope limitation. We can now a little bit with Google and search engines. But we're really not good at comparing, this one thing that we're evaluating it and looking at it in the absolute versus everything else, all of our other options in the world. We can't do it. And now that we can search, and most of us have phones with internet search capabilities, it's becoming easier to do this.
Right.
But we always compare things versus everything else in the environment. And so
only versus what's in the store, not versus what you could get down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's important for you to understand both, so you can make comparisons a little bit better, because knowing that this is taking place is actually a way to route around it a little bit. The other way is as you're selling, as you're marketing, your customers are making contrasts. And part of framing is making sure that the contrasts that your customers are making are the ones that present yourself and your offer in a good light. So, one of the contrast things that I love to use, with this course is actually, it's $149,000 less than a top tier business school program. That's contrast.
Right.
I'm taking something and I'm comparing it against something else with similar qualities, and that does it in a favorable light.
Right.
And so you can use, if you know what contrast is, if you know how people do it, you can actually use this in terms of framing to make sure that people perceive what you have to offer in a positive way. That's contrast.